Alrighty, so Apple. They make phones, if you haven't heard of them. And specifically, they have a huge factory in Zhengzhou, China. When we say huge, we're talking reportedly up to 300,000 workers working in a factory. Okay, so this is not even, Elon Musk's gigafactory. This is just orders of magnitude beyond something like that. And at one point, that factory made 85% of all the Pro lineup of iPhones produced in the world. Okay? And this was also one of the factories that had protests that popped up in November in China. And Apple's been, again, we've talked a lot over the last year or so about how they're starting to diversify their production out of China. But, and this is, I'm going to quote from the Wall Street Journal here, coming after a year of events that weakened China's status as a stable manufacturing center, the upheaval means Apple no longer feels comfortable having so much of its business tied up in one place, according to analysts and people in the Apple supply chain. Quote, in the past, people didn't pay attention to concentration risks. Now they do. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, when you talk about how Apple has gotten to this point, it's been a multi-decade process to build this up. Apple didn't walk into China back in 2000 and say, hey, we've got this idea for this iPod. We'd like to hire 300,000 of your best workers to make it. It's been a gradual ramp to this point. Likewise, any move out of China, it's not going to be instantaneous either, and I still expect they maintain a big footprint there. But we've seen data before where, depending on the product, they produce anywhere from about 80 to 100% of different products in China now. I wouldn't be surprised if they want to get down to kind of 50% as a max threshold over the next decade or so.
It sounds like that could take decades.
10 to 15 years.
Yeah, Bloomberg back in September, you guys probably covered this, estimated that it would take about a decade just to reduce production dependence of Apple on China production by about the same amount. So to shift 10% of production out would take nearly a decade, and maybe that's optimistic. It assumes maybe no snags or few snags, who knows. 98% of iPhones in this same article, dating back a couple months, but the analytics are probably still, the analysis is probably still valid, pointed out that nearly all iPhones to date have been made in China. I mean, could this be a fatal error for them if, God forbid, there's some open conflict with China over Taiwan?
Then it could be. Yeah. And
Apple can't do business.
And here's the thing. No matter what, even in the best case scenario, so let's say that Apple is able to successfully move production out of China to some extent, because they're never going to abandon it completely unless you have, Cold War 2.0, where you really can't get goods in and out of China at some point. Let's say you have your best case scenario. There still is no world that I envision, and I'm not saying this because I think that this is a good thing. I'm just saying that this is the situation as it is. There's no world in which Apple is able to have still the efficiency, the low cost, and the reliability of the production they've had for the last 20 years. Because there is nowhere else in the world that you can get a regime that's as responsive to you and as authoritarian as they are to their own people as the Chinese Communist Party. Apple comes in and says, hey, we want to build a factory for 20,000 people here. Chinese Communist Party says, great, we'll clear the land, we'll get all the people out of there, and here are your 20,000 workers on day one. I'm not saying that this is a good thing for Apple, even if it's a bad thing for humanity, right? There's nowhere else in the world that does that. So no matter where you go, you are going to have higher costs, less reliability, and less efficiency because no one operates in the same authoritarian way as China. Even all the countries that want to be like China, they're still not the same when it comes to their ability to do stuff like this. So, again, I'm not saying this because I envy China. I'm saying this if you're looking at Apple as a company, the last 20 years were probably the best they ever are going to have it in terms of their supply chain.
That's an excellent point.